Hey guys, I want to go over lesson 7.3 fractions multiplied by whole numbers. Tomorrow is day 3 of our extended break, and the lesson for day 3 is lesson 7.3 in your chapter 7 book. So I want to go over a few problems with you, and let's start out with a problem that's on page 437 of your chapter 7 book. And that's going to be 4/5 times 10. 4/5 times 10. Now, in the first two lessons, we used models, we used pictures. In lesson 7.3, we kind of cut to the chase and introduce a more traditional, algorithm or way of solving the problem. And so what we're going to do is in the whole number 10 in our problem, we're actually going to put a 1 underneath that 10. You may be wondering why. Well, since all fractions are really just division problems, 10 over 1 is just 10 divided by 1, which gives us a value of 10. And so you see, by putting a 1 under the 10, we haven't really changed the problem at all. But we have made the problem easier to work with. And that's because putting a 1 under the whole number reminds us that we're going to multiply the two numerators together and the two denominators together. The problem is if you don't put that 1 there and you don't remember that the whole number is multiplied by the numerator, you might get confused and you might multiply the 4 and the 5 by 10. Well, what's interesting about multiplying the 4 and the 5 by 10 is what you really did is you multiplied by 10 over 10. And we know that 10 over 10 is equal to 1. And so even though you may end up with a fraction that looks a little different than 4/5, in actuality, it's the same value as 4/5. So putting the 1 under the whole number actually helps prevent us from making that mistake. So let's go ahead and work this out. I'm going to multiply the 4 and the 10. Those are my numerators. And that's going to give me 40 as the numerator in my product. And then we're going to multiply my 5 and my 1 to get 5 in the denominator. But if you were to put 40 over 5 into Think Central, unfortunately, while you are correct, it would say you need to simplify your answer. So how do we simplify 40 over 5 or 40/5? Well, recall that all fractions are really just division problems. So we're going to divide 40 by 5. We know that 5 goes into 40 8 times. And so 40/5 is going to simplify to 8. And that's the answer Think Central wants you to type in. So let's look at another example that's going to require a little more simplifying. And you'll see what I mean here in a moment. So let's say we do 2/5 times the whole number 6. And I'm going to put a 1 under the 6, just like in my last problem. And I'm going to multiply my two numerators, 2 and 6, and get 12 as my product's numerator. And then I'm going to multiply the 5 and the 1 and get my 5 for my product's denominator. Well, again, I'm going to divide the 12 by 5. And 5 goes into 12 twice. And I'm going to get 2/5. And so this problem is going to give me, as a mixed number, 2 and 2/5. So I had to do a little extra work on this problem, turning the remainder into a fraction. And this is what Think Central would like to see, 2 and 2/5 as opposed to 12/5. Now let's take a look at a problem that's going to require even more steps in the simplifying process. So let's try this. So we have a whole number 8 We're going to multiply it by 5/6. And just like the previous two problems, I'm going to put a 1 under my whole number. And I'm going to multiply across the top, the 8 and the 5, to give me 40 as the numerator of my product. And I'm going to multiply across the bottom, 1 times 6, and that's going to give me a 6 in the denominator of our product. And so the answer is 46. But we're going to need to do some simplifying. So first, we're going to convert the improper fraction 46 into the mixed number by dividing 40 by 6. We know 6 goes into 46 times. And 6 times 6 gives us 36. And when we find the difference of 36 and 40, it's at 4. And I'm going to write my 4 as the numerator and my divisor 6 as the denominator in my mixed number. And you might be thinking, well, this is great. I got 6 and 4, 6. Surely think Central's going to accept this. Fortunately, it won't, because 4/6, the fraction in the mixed numbers 6 and 4/6, is still not completely simplified. So let's go ahead and completely simplify 4/6. And in order to do that, I'm going to write factor pairs for the numerator 4, and I'm going to write factor pairs for the denominator 6. So, of course, 1 and 4 is a factor pair, and the only other factor pair is 2 times 2. And for 6, we have 1 and 6, and we have 2 and 3, and that's it. So we have all the factor pairs for 4 and 6, and now what we need to do is we need to find the greatest common factor. So we need to find the factor that they both have, that's the largest out of all the factors they have in common. So they definitely have 1 in common, but we can find another factor that's even bigger. And in this case, it's 2. And that's why 2 is the greatest common factor. So what do I do with my greatest common factor? Well, I'm going to divide my numerator and my denominator by that greatest common factor. And we know 4 divided by 2 is 2, and we know 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now, one interesting thing to point out here is that 2/3 is the same thing as 4/6. And I know that because when I divided by 2 over 2, well, I really just divided by 1. And anything divided by 1 is just going to give you that same thing. So fractions are interesting because we can have two very different looking fractions, 4/6 and 2/3, but they actually have the same value. So I kind of think about it like you could have a Chihuahua and a Great Dane, and even though they look really different, they're both still technically dogs. And though they may not be equal, it still reminds me that we can change the appearance of a fraction while still keeping its value. So I want to go over one more type of question before I let you go. And please remember to be working on your workbook pages as well as your Think Centrals. And if you ever have any questions, please don't hesitate to call or email or even invite me to a hangout, and I can work with you right then and there. All right. So I wanted to show you a problem like this, and it requires a little bit of algebraic thinking, because what we're doing is we're finding the value of a mystery number. So what I have here is some numerator over 2 multiplied by the whole number 8, and it equals the whole number 4. Well, I'm going to use what I know about multiplying fractions, and I'm going to use my knowledge of multiplication and division facts to help solve this problem. Now, one of the nice things about algebra is because you're plugging numbers into different places in an expression or an equation, you can always check and see if you're right. And if you're wrong, you can just keep trying. So, for instance, let's just guess. Let's just make that our first strategy. So maybe you think 3 sounds like a good idea. So you could replace the question mark with a 3, put it over 2, multiply by 8, see if you get 4. So I'm going to put a 1 under the 8. I got 3 times 8 is 24. And I'm going to multiply my 2 by 1. And I get 2. And so 3 halves, or 3 over 2, multiplied by 8, gives me 24 halves, or 24 over 2. Well, if I simplify that, I find that, well, it equals 12, which is a lot bigger than 4. But even though I got it wrong, that still tells me something about the value that's above the 2. It tells me that it's got to be less than 3, because 3 gave me a number that's a lot bigger than the 4 that I'm trying to get to. So that would leave me with 2 more options, right? I could try 1, I could try 2. But I'm going to use a little bit of algebraic thinking here and my knowledge of multiplying fractions to narrow in on the correct answer. So because I'm multiplying a fraction with a denominator of 2 by 8, I know that the unsimplified product is going to have a denominator of 2. The question is, what is my numerator going to be? Well, I know that whatever it is divided by 2 equals 4. So I can ask myself, what divided by 2 equals 4? And if I don't immediately know, I can always use multiplication. So I can multiply 4, the number I'm supposed to get in my equation, by the denominator 2, and that gives me 8. It's interesting. So that would mean that the mystery number above the 2 in my product would have to be an 8. Okay. So now going back to the original problem, am I saying that 8 goes over 2? Well, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is something times the whole number 8 should give me 8 in my product, because 8 divided by 2 is going to give me 4. There's only one number in the universe times 8 that's going to give you 8, and that's the number 1. So let's put a 1 up here and try our problem out, see what happens. So if I multiply this out, I'm going to get 8 times 1, which is 8. I'm going to multiply 2 times 1, which is 2. And 8 divided by 2 gives me the 4 I'm looking for. No pun intended. So my mystery number was 1. So I wish you luck working on lesson 7.3 in the Go Math book, as well as in your Think Central assignments. Please let me know if you guys have any questions at all, and I look forward to seeing you in the morning.